The gate of respect. The airport was busy that morning, as if everyone in the city had decided to fly at the same time. People rushed through the wide hallways, dragging suitcases behind them, some talking on their phones, others just looking tired and impatient. Sundar Pichai stood quietly near Gate 42, holding a small black bag and a folded newspaper. He wore a plain gray jacket and simple jeans. Nothing about him screamed importance. He liked it that way. His flight to San Francisco was boarding soon, and he glanced at his watch. Still 10 minutes. He took a deep breath, enjoying the quiet in his mind before what was going to be a long week of meetings, decisions, and cameras. He always thought of airports as a kind of test. Everyone reveals who they are in airports. Patience, respect, and kindness are either there or they are not at that moment. The woman appeared. She was tall with sharp eyes and a designer coat. She held a first-class ticket in one hand and a coffee in the other. Her heels clicked loudly as she walked past Sundar, stopping at the front of the line. When the gate agent called for first-class passengers, Sundar stepped forward too. The woman turned and looked at him, frowning. "Excuse me," she said, her voice cold. "This is the first-class line." Sundar smiled softly. "Yes, I know." Her eyes narrowed. "Well, I think you might be in the wrong place. Economy is boarding later." People behind them started watching. The agent looked slightly uncomfortable. Sundar kept his calm. "Thank you," he said quietly. "But this is my line." The woman scoffed. "Oh, please," she said. "You're clearly not." She stopped herself, but her tone said enough. She didn't think he belonged there. Inside, Sundar felt a familiar sting. He had felt it before, as a boy walking to school in Chennai with his shoes falling apart. He had felt it in college when someone laughed at his accent. He thought he had grown used to it, but every time it still hurt. Still, he just nodded, not saying more. The gate agent scanned his ticket. "Have a pleasant flight, Mr. Pichai." The woman's jaw tightened. She said nothing but glared at him as he walked past her and into the jet bridge. But Sundar's mind was not at peace. As he settled into his seat, he thought about what had just happened. He thought about how many people would have just swallowed the hurt quietly. He thought about how often the world judged people by their clothes, their skin, their accent, and how he still carried those scars himself. But he also thought of his mother's words from long ago, the way someone treats you says nothing about you. It only shows who they are. As the plane taxied to the runway, he closed his eyes and remembered the boy he had been. Shy, quiet, yet always curious. And he remembered the teacher who once told him, "You will go far if you never stop learning." That boy was still here, inside him. The flight was smooth at first. He tried to read his notes for the meeting, but the woman in the next seat kept giving him strange looks. She finally leaned over and said in a low voice, "So, what do you do?" Sundar looked at her calmly. "I work in technology." She raised an eyebrow. "Oh, a programmer or something?" He smiled faintly. "Something like that." She smirked as if she had won some kind of argument. "Well, good for you." She sighed, turning away. He didn't correct her. Not yet, but inside he was thinking about her, about himself. About what people like her could learn if they were willing to see and then something unexpected happened. Midway through the flight, the captain's voice came over the speakers, saying there was a medical emergency in the cabin. They needed help immediately. The flight attendants moved quickly, and soon Sundar saw a young boy in distress 2 rows behind him. His mother was crying quietly, holding his hand. The woman next to Sundar gasped. "Oh God, is he okay?" She said. Sundar stood up at once and walked over. He didn't know much about medicine, but he knew how to keep calm, how to speak gently. To people in panic, he crouched next to the boy and asked his name. The boy whispered it, eyes full of fear. "You're going to be all right," Sundar said softly. "Just keep breathing. You're not alone." The flight attendants brought oxygen, and soon the boy's breathing steadied. The whole cabin seemed to exhale in relief. The boy's mother looked at Sundar with tears in her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. Sundar just nodded. He returned to his seat quietly. The woman next to him stared at him now, confused. "You didn't have to do that, she said finally. He looked at her and said simply, "We all have to do what we can." She didn't reply, but later, when the plane landed and everyone stood to leave, the gate agent came to Sundar and said, "Mr. Pichai, your car is waiting just outside." The woman froze when she heard the name. She looked at him, her eyes wide. "Now, wait," she stammered. "You're—" But before she could finish, Sundar gave her a kind smile and said softly, "Have a good day." And he walked away. But the story didn't end there. Because when he reached the car and got in, he noticed something odd. There was an envelope on the seat with his name on it. Inside was a single sheet of paper. And on it, in shaky handwriting, was a message that would change everything. If you want to understand why this happened today, meet me at the corner of 3rd and Mission tonight at 8. He stared at the note for a long time. His driver asked if everything was all right. Sundar looked out the window at the busy airport, his mind already racing because he knew that corner. And he knew that tonight would not be ordinary. He felt the old feeling again, the mix of fear and curiosity, the quiet determination that had carried him from a small home in India to where he was now. Something was waiting for him there, something he didn't yet understand. The car pulled away from the airport, and as he watched the city skyline appear in the distance, he realized he hadn't felt this alive in years. And as the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the streets, he thought to himself, this is just the beginning. Asterisk the quarter of truth. Car moved steadily through the evening traffic, and Sundar sat in the back seat, staring at the folded note in his hands as though it held some ancient secret. Outside, the city began to glow in soft golds and sharp reds as the sun sank lower, streetlights flickering to life one by one. The driver didn't speak, but Sundar could feel his eyes glancing up occasionally in the mirror, perhaps sensing the tension that hung in the air like a thin sheet of glass waiting to crack. His fingers traced the edges of the paper again and again. The handwriting was shaky, as if the writer had been nervous or in a hurry. It carried no name, no clue, except for those words. If you want to understand why this happened today, meet me at the corner of 3rd and Mission tonight at 8, he read. The line over and over, letting the words sink into him, feeling their quiet weight in his chest. What did it mean? Why this happened today? Was it about the woman at the airport, her disdainful glare and the way she tried to push him aside? Was it about the boy who almost stopped breathing mid-flight? Or was it about something deeper, something older than either of those moments? His mind wandered back to his childhood, to narrow streets in Chennai, where he used to run barefoot to school, clutching a single notebook and dreaming of worlds he hadn't yet seen. He thought of his father, who came home every night with tired eyes and a quiet dignity, and his mother, who never let her children feel the weight of how little they had. The lesson had been clear even then. Respect was not about titles or money or clothing. Respect was about how you treated people when you thought no one was watching. And yet, even now, even after all his years of work, after the long journey, from those dusty streets to where he sat now, there were still moments when the world reminded him that, to some people, he would never truly belong. But tonight felt different. This note felt like more than just a stranger's curiosity or a cruel joke. It felt deliberate, personal, as though someone had been waiting for the right moment to reach out. By the time the car pulled up near the intersection of 3rd and Mission, the streets were glowing with neon signs and headlights, and the sidewalks bustled with people heading home or going out for the night. Sundar stepped out, the cool evening air wrapping around him, and looked around slowly. He saw a group of young men laughing loudly by a corner store, a woman selling flowers on the curb, a tired-looking man leaning against the wall with a cigarette dangling between his fingers. The driver stayed nearby but did not follow him as Sundar walked towards the exact corner mentioned in the note. It was quieter here. There was a small, empty bus shelter and a flickering streetlight overhead. The hum of the city seemed to fade just slightly, as if the world was holding its breath. For a few moments, nothing happened. Sundar stood there, his hands in his pockets, waiting. The air smelled faintly of rain and gasoline. Then he noticed her. She was sitting on the edge of the bus shelter bench, her coat wrapped tightly around her. Her face was hidden beneath the shadow of a wide scarf, but as he moved closer, she lifted her head, and Sundar froze that it was the same woman from the airport. She rose slowly, her heels clicking softly on the pavement this time, and looked at him with a gaze that no longer carried disdain. Her eyes seemed different now, wide, unsettled, almost afraid. "You came," she said quietly. Sundar studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "You left a note?" She hesitated, then pulled the scarf tighter around herself. "Yes." "Why?" he asked, his voice calm but firm. "What do you want from me?" Her eyes darted away, as though she couldn't quite meet his gaze yet. "You don't understand," she whispered. "What happened on that plane? It wasn't what it looked like." He tilted his head slightly, confusion flickering in his chest. "Then explain it to me." She glanced around nervously before stepping closer, her voice dropping to almost nothing. "They're watching," she said. "Not just me. You too. Everyone." Sundar frowned, unsure if this was some strange performance or something more serious. "Who's watching?" he asked, his voice steady. She swallowed hard, then finally met his eyes. "The people who own everything," she said. "The ones you think you work for. The ones who sit behind the curtains and pull the strings. You're not just a man who came from nothing and rose to the top. You're part of something much bigger than you realize." Her words hung in the air like fog, thick and hard to see through. Sundar felt a chill crawl up his spine. "You don't know me," he said carefully. "You don't know what I've been through." She shook her head. "I know more than you think," she said. And I know what they're planning for you." "Next," he narrowed his eyes. "And what's that?" She took a deep breath, then leaned closer, her voice a mere whisper now. "They're going to destroy you," she said, "unless you play their game. Unless you do exactly what they want." Sundar's chest tightened, but his face remained calm. "And who exactly are they?" She pulled back slightly, glancing over her shoulder. Her eyes shimmered under the streetlight, and he noticed for the first time that her hands were trembling. "I can't say here," she murmured. "But if you care about everything you've built, if you care about the people who believe, and you meet me tomorrow, same time, but not here. There's a cafe on the east side called The Quiet Room. Ask for the back table." She paused, then added, "And come alone." Before he could ask more, she turned and walked away quickly, disappearing into the crowd. Sundar stood there, staring after her, his mind a storm of questions. He didn't move for a long time. Finally, he walked back to the car, his footsteps heavy on the pavement inside. The driver glanced at him in the mirror but didn't say anything. Sundar leaned back in the seat and closed his eyes. He thought of the woman's words, about the ones who owned everything, about being destroyed unless he played along, and felt something he hadn't felt in years. Fear. Also something else. A spark of determination that had carried him through every dark corner of his life. He opened his eyes and looked out the window as the car merged back into the river of headlights. He didn't know what waited for him at that cafe tomorrow, but he knew he would go because he had to know, because he couldn't let fear decide for him, because he was Sundar and he had been underestimated his whole life. He arrived at his hotel late, the city quieting down outside his window. But sleep didn't come easily. He kept thinking of her eyes, how they'd gone from cruel at the airport to desperate at the corner, just before dawn. He finally drifted off, his mind still buzzing with her final words echoing in the silence. "They're going to destroy you unless you play their game." Asterisk, the quiet room, morning sun spilled into the hotel room like liquid gold. But Sundar barely noticed it. He sat on the edge of the bed, still dressed from the night before, his fingers tracing the seam of the envelope. Again and again. Outside, the city roared to life. Car horns, distant sirens, the murmur of footsteps on the pavement below. But inside his room it was quiet, almost oppressively so. He had slept only a few hours, his mind turning in circles. Around her words, "They're going to destroy you unless you play their game." He wondered what exactly she meant. All his life he had fought hard to believe in merit, in kindness, in the value of persistence. He had believed the world, despite its flaws, rewarded those who showed up, worked hard, and stayed humble. But now, a small doubt crept in. Was it all just a stage, with others pulling the strings behind a curtain he had never noticed? Had he only been allowed to succeed because someone somewhere had decided it was useful for him to succeed? He didn't want to believe that. But as he thought about her trembling hands and haunted eyes at the corner last night, he knew she believed it. And he needed to know why by late afternoon he found himself standing in front of a modest cafe on the east side of the city. The sign above the door was faded and chipped. The quiet room. The street here was narrower, quieter, as if the world itself had decided to hold its breath. The window panes reflected the gray sky above, and inside he could see only dim light. And empty chairs. He pushed the door open, and a small bell chimed overhead. The air inside smelled faintly of coffee and old wood. The few patrons inside sat hunched over mugs, their eyes distant, no one speaking louder than a whisper. The woman behind the counter, older, with kind but weary eyes, looked up at him as though she'd been expecting him. Back table. She said softly before he could even open his mouth. He blinked but nodded, making his way toward the rear of the cafe. The wooden floor creaked under his feet. The walls were lined with faded photographs. Strangers, some smiling, some serious, and a faint tune played from a dusty radio on a high-shelf dot in the very back. There was a single table tucked into a shadowy corner. She was already there, waiting. She looked different today. The sharp edges of her presence were softened somehow. Her scarf was gone, her coat replaced by a plain sweater. Her hands, still trembling slightly, were wrapped around a mug of coffee. When she saw him, her lips pressed into a thin line, not quite a smile, not quite regret. "You came," she said quietly. He slid into the chair opposite her, his gaze steady. She nodded, looking down at her hands. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Then she drew a deep breath and began. "My name is Lena," she said. "I used to believe in the same things you do. That if you worked hard enough, stayed honest, you'd rise. I thought the people at the top earned it. I thought respect was something you could earn even if you started with nothing." She paused, her eyes glistening now, but I was wrong. Sundar leaned forward slightly, his voice low and calm. "What happened to you?" Her fingers tightened around the mug. "I got close," she said. "Too close. I started noticing things. Small things at first. Meetings I wasn't told about. Memos that disappeared after being signed. Decisions that made no sense unless you assumed someone else was pulling the strings." She glanced up at him, her gaze sharp now. "I thought I could expose it. I thought if I just showed the truth, they'd fix it. Instead," she swallowed hard. "Instead, they crushed me. They stripped me of everything. My job, my reputation, my friends. They made me look crazy. Now no one listens when I speak." Sundar listened carefully, the weight of her words sinking into his chest. "Who are they?" He asked softly. "You keep saying they." "Lena's?" Hands shook as she reached into her bag and pulled out a small, folded piece of paper. She slid it across the table. Sundar opened it carefully. It was a photograph, grainy, clearly taken in secret, of 5 people seated around a massive, polished table in a dark room. He couldn't make out their faces clearly, but their posture, their presence, suggested power. "Those are the ones who decide," Lena whispered. "The ones who decide who gets to rise, who falls, who is allowed to speak, who is silenced. They own the stage you've been walking on all these years." Sundar stared at the photo, then looked up at her. "Why are you telling me this?" he asked. "Why now?" Her eyes softened, and for the first time he saw something like sorrow there. "Because," she said, "you're next. And because I remember what it felt like to believe. I don't want you to wake up one day and realize too late that you were never really free." A long silence settled between them. Sundar looked back down at the photograph. Something inside him, something small but fierce, resisted her words. But another part of him, a quieter part, whispered that perhaps she was right. He thought of the times decisions had seemed too easy, too perfect, as though someone had already cleared his path before he arrived. He slid the photo back across the table. So, what do you expect me to do? He asked. Lena, single quotes tightened. You have two choices, she said. Play their game. Let them use you. Smile, succeed, but on their terms. Or, she paused, her breath catching slightly. Or you step off the stage, walk away. But if you do that, they will come for you. He felt a chill crawl up his spine at her words. Why me? He murmured, why not someone else? She leaned closer now, her voice barely above a whisper. Because, she said, you're visible. People believe in you. And that makes you dangerous. Just then, the bell above the cafe door chimed again. Both Sundar and Lena glanced up. A tall man in a black suit stepped inside, his eyes scanning. The room, he didn't look like just another customer. His gaze settled on their table for a moment too long before he walked to the counter and ordered a coffee. Lena stiffened. Her fingers clutched her bag tighter. She leaned in close to Sundar and spoke quickly, her voice shaking. You need to go, she said. Right now. What about you? Sundar asked. She shook her head. They already know me. But you still have a choice. The man in the suit glanced back at them as the barista handed his cup. His expression was blank, but his presence radiated something Sundar couldn't quite name. Authority, danger, inevitability. Sundar hesitated. Part of him wanted to stay, to demand more answers right now. But Lena's eyes, wide with quiet urgency, told him this wasn't the moment. He rose slowly, his chair scraping softly against the floor. Tomorrow? He asked. Quietly, Lena shook her head. They'll expect that, she whispered. I'll find you. Without another word, Sundar turned and walked toward the door, his heart pounding louder with each step. As he passed the man in the suit, their eyes met for the briefest moment. The man gave him a faint, knowing smile. Outside, the air felt colder, heavier. The sun had set while they spoke, and the city lights sparkled like distant stars. Indifferent to what was unfolding below, Sundar stood on the sidewalk, the photograph still burning in his mind, and felt the weight of a choice settling onto his shoulders. He could feel it now, the thin line between safety and danger, between obedience and truth. He didn't know yet which way he would go, but deep inside, he knew this was no longer just about him. He walked into the night, his steps steady, but his mind swirling, the quiet room's door closing softly behind him. The man in the suit emerged from the cafe, watching him with patient eyes. Asterisk, the first strike, city was quieter than usual that night. Or maybe it only felt that way because Sundar's own heartbeat was so loud in his ears. He walked with measured steps down the uneven sidewalk, his hands buried deep in his pockets, his mind replaying Lena's words over and over. You're visible. People believe in you. And that makes you dangerous. Behind him, the faint sound of footsteps followed. Not hurried, not clumsy, deliberate. He didn't need to look back to know it was the man in the suit. He could feel the weight of the man's gaze on his back, sharp as a blade yet calm, almost bored. When Sundar turned the corner, he saw a cab idling near the curb and stepped into the street quickly, waving it down. The driver glanced at him in the mirror and muttered something about the cold as Sundar slid into the back seat. Before the cab could pull away, Sundar's eyes flicked to the corner, and sure enough, the man in the suit stood there still, watching, his face half hidden in shadow. The cab moved forward, the city lights flashing across the windows. Sundar leaned back in the seat, exhaling slowly, trying to steady the storm inside his chest. For the first time in years, he felt something he wasn't used to feeling. Helplessness. He hated it. But it was there, a cold, heavy stone at the pit of his stomach. The woman's story, the photograph of the 5 figures at the table, the way the man in the suit had watched him like a hunter tracking its prey. It all painted a picture he didn't want to believe in, but couldn't ignore anymore. When he reached his hotel, he didn't go straight to his room. Instead, he sat in a dimly lit lobby for almost an hour, pretending to read a newspaper while his eyes discreetly scanned the room. At least 2 people came in, glanced around, and left without approaching the front desk. He wondered if they were watching him too. When he finally went up to his room, he locked the door behind him and drew the curtains tight. Then he did something he hadn't done in a long time. He pulled out his old notebook, the same one he used to carry as a boy in Chennai, and began writing. Not emails, not memos, not speeches. Just thoughts, feelings, names, questions. Who are the 5? Why him? What did they want? He wrote until the page was full of words, arrows, underlines, and in the center of it all, one word circled over and over. Lena. The next morning he woke early and decided not to wait for her to find him. He needed to know more. Now. He dressed plainly, left the hotel by a side entrance, and made his way to the company's San Francisco office. Hoping to use the resources at his disposal without drawing too much attention, he walked through the familiar glass doors, nodding at the receptionist as though everything was normal, though inside his stomach churned. Once in his office, he sat at his desk and opened his laptop, fingers flying across the keyboard as he searched through archived emails. Personnel files. Anything that might reveal who Lena really was. It didn't take long to find her name. Lena Ramos. She had once been a senior strategy analyst, bright, talented, even celebrated for her innovative thinking. But then something strange happened. 4 years ago, her file abruptly ended. Her email was deactivated overnight. Her name scrubbed from the company directory. No reason listed. No record of termination. Sundar leaned back in his chair, staring at the screen. Then his phone buzzed. He hesitated before answering. "You're early?" said Lena's voice, low and tense. "I need answers," he said simply. She sighed. "You're making them nervous." He lowered his voice. "Who are they? Tell me." There was a long pause on the line. Then she spoke, her words deliberate and heavy. "You already met one of them last night. The man in the suit. His name is irrelevant. They change names like clothes. But they're watching you now. If you really want to understand, you'll have to see it for yourself. Tonight. No more hiding behind questions." He felt a tight knot form in his chest. "Where?" She gave him an address, a warehouse on the outskirts of the city. "Don't bring your phone," she added. "Don't bring anyone. And don't be late." That evening, he stood in front of the warehouse, the wind whipping through the empty lot around him. The building was dark, its windows blacked out. There were no signs, no lights, just the faint hum of something unseen inside. He hesitated at the door, his hand hovering over the handle. Then he pushed it open and stepped into the dark. The air inside smelled faintly of dust and metal. A single dim bulb hung from the ceiling, swinging slightly. In the center of the vast room was a long table, and at it sat 5 figures, their faces cloaked in shadow, just as they had been in the photograph. And at the end of the table stood the man in the suit, his expression calm, almost amused. "You have been curious," the man said, his voice smooth and cold. Sundar swallowed the dry lump in his throat, but kept his gaze steady. "I want the truth." One of the figures leaned forward slightly, revealing only the faintest outline of their face. "Truth?" they said softly, the word almost a hiss. "You've already lived it. We gave it to you. Every choice you thought was yours. Every door you thought you opened. Every success you thought you earned. We placed you where we needed you, and you played your part beautifully." Their words slammed into him like a wave. He opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. The man in the suit stepped closer, his eyes glinting in the dim light. "And now," he said, "we offer you your next role." "Oh, we end the show." Sundar felt the weight of the room press down on him, the cold certainty of their control, the impossible choice they were presenting him. He thought of Lena, of her trembling hands, of the quiet despair in her eyes when she told him they crushed her. He straightened his back, drew in a slow breath, and met the man's gaze. "And if I say no?" he asked quietly. The man smiled, faintly, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Then you disappear," he said simply. "And no one will even remember you were here." At that moment, a faint sound broke the silence. A soft click, like a lock turning. Sundar glanced toward the door and saw a shadow move. Just outside Lena. She was here, and her hand, glinting faintly in the light, was something that looked very much like a key, asterisk, the breaking point. The room was silent except for the faint. The single light bulb swinging overhead. Sundar stood very still, his eyes fixed on the man in the suit, but his mind was already turning toward the door. He had seen her, Lena, a shadow beyond the frame, the glint of a key in her, hand catching the light for just an instant before she melted back into the dark. It had been so quick, so subtle, that he almost doubted he had seen it at all. But something inside him, the same instinct that had carried him through every storm, told him she was there. Waiting at the table, the 5 figures sat in perfect stillness. None of them spoke. They didn't need to. Their silence was heavier than words, a quiet declaration of how little they feared him. He felt it like a weight on his chest, the full force of their presence pressing down on him, daring him to speak, daring him to make the wrong move. The man in the suit finally broke the silence, stepping forward until there was barely a foot of space between them. His voice was low and steady, almost casual. "This is not a choice you can take lightly," he said. "You think you've earned your place in the world. But every place you've stood, every door you've walked through, we opened it for you. We chose you. We shaped you. And now we are asking you one final time. Join us or disappear." The words settled into the air like smoke, and Sundar felt their sharp edges cut into him. Part of him wanted to believe it was a lie, that all his work, all his sacrifices, all the nights spent dreaming under bare light bulbs and ceilings that leaked, that they had meant something. But another part of him, the part that remembered how perfectly timed his opportunities had always seemed, whispered that maybe Lena had been right. He took a slow breath and straightened his back. His hands were steady now. "What happens?" he asked, his voice soft but clear. "If I choose to walk away?" The man's lips curved into a faint smile, but there was no kindness. Then you won't be walking for long." He replied. A faint sound interrupted them, then so soft most people would have missed it. A metallic click, followed by the almost inaudible creak of a door opening behind him. Sundar's eyes flicked toward it, but the man in the suit stepped closer, blocking his view. "You're hesitating," the man said, his voice colder now. "That's dangerous. Don't mistake this for a negotiation." "We don't negotiate. You are not the first to stand here, and you will not be the last. But you might be the first to learn what happens when someone believes their own story." Sundar's gaze hardened, and just as he opened his mouth to reply, the light above them flickered, once, twice, then went out. Darkness swallowed the room, a rush of air behind him, a sudden scrape of a chair. Then chaos. Sundar spun toward the sound just as a figure lunged into the room from the shadows near the door. Lena. Her scarf was wrapped tight around her face now, but her eyes burned with a fierce determination. In her hand glinted a long, thin blade, not a gun, but a knife so sharp it caught the faint glow from the streetlight seeping through the cracks in the boarded windows. The man in the suit reacted quickly, reaching into his jacket, but before he could draw anything, Lena was already on him. "Run." She hissed at Sundar as she slammed into the man's side, knocking him off balance. For a split second, Sundar stood frozen. It would have been easier to stay, to obey, to let the 5 decide his future for him. But somewhere deep inside him, the boy from Chennai, the boy who once refused to sit silently in the back row, who carried broken shoes to class and still believed he could change his life, roared awake. He ran. He shoved the chair aside, darting toward the door. Behind him, he heard a scuffle, the sharp clatter of something metallic hitting the floor. Lena's breath coming fast and hard, the man's curses rising in fury. He didn't look back. The corridor beyond the door was pitch black, narrow, and lined with crates and shadows. He could feel his heart hammering in his chest, every step echoing louder than it should. Behind him, he heard the heavy thud of footsteps. Someone was following. He turned sharply, his shoulder slamming into the wall, and stumbled into another doorway. He found himself in a stairwell that spiraled downward into deeper darkness. He descended fast, 2 steps at a time, his hand skimming the rough concrete wall to keep his balance. The air grew colder and damp, and with every floor he passed, the sounds behind him grew louder. More footsteps. More voices at the bottom of the stairs. A heavy metal door stood slightly ajar, faint light spilling through the gap. He shoved it open and stepped into another vast room, this one empty except for a single chair in the center, and walls lined with strange, unmarked machines humming faintly. And then he saw her. Lena stood in the center of the room now, her back to him, her chest rising and falling as she caught her breath. The scarf was gone, her face pale but fierce. In her other hand, she now held something else, a small black device that looked almost like a remote. She turned when she heard him enter, her eyes meeting his. "You made it," she breathed, almost a smile playing at her lips. "What is this place?" he demanded, his voice sharp but low. She shook her head slightly. "This is the part they never let anyone see," she murmured. "The heart of it all. Everything they've done to you, to me, to everyone. It starts here, and tonight it ends." Sundar frowned, his breath still coming in short bursts. "What do you mean?" Lena held up the black device. Her hand trembled just slightly. "This," she said, "is their reset switch. Every record, every file, every thread they've used to control you, wiped. You'll disappear from their game completely. No one to pull your strings. No one to threaten you anymore." Sundar stared at the device, his thoughts spinning. "But," Lena added softly, "once I press it, you'll also lose everything they gave you. Your name, your position, your influence, all gone. You'll be free, but invisible." Behind them, the sound of heavy footsteps returned, closer this time, echoing through the stairwell. The man in the suit's voice carried faintly through the walls, calm but edged with anger now. "You can still come back," he called. "There's still time to stop this foolishness." Lena's fingers hovered over the button. She turned to Sundar, her eyes wide and unflinching. "It has to be your choice," she said. "You press it, or you walk back out there and sit back down at their table." The footsteps were almost at the door now. The knob rattled faintly, a shadow falling across the floor as the man's silhouette appeared just beyond the threshold. Sundar stared at the device, his chest rising and falling, the noise around him fading into silence as everything hinged on this moment. He thought of his mother's hand smoothing his hair when he was small, of his father's quiet dignity as he worked late into the night, of the boy he used to be, barefoot and unafraid to dream. He reached out slowly, his fingers brushing the cool surface of the device. Behind him, the door began to open. Lena, single quotes, a breath caught. The man's voice cut through the air, cold, final. "Don't." And Sundar closed his eyes. And pressed the button. Asterisk after the silence. Room went dark the instant he pressed the button. Not just dim, but truly dark. The faint hum of the machines stopped. The soft, steady glow of their lights blinked out all at once, leaving behind nothing but silence. For a moment, Sundar felt suspended in that silence, the small black device still warm in his palm. He opened his eyes slowly, expecting to see the faint silhouette of the man in the suit lunging forward to stop him, or Lena shouting instructions. But there was nothing. Just quiet, and then came the sound, a deep, low groan, like metal tearing under pressure, echoing from somewhere far beneath the floor. The walls seemed to shiver. A faint wind whispered through the cracks in the building, carrying with it the smell of dust and something else, something sharp, electric, almost like ozone. Sundar dropped the device. It landed on the floor with a hollow clatter and lay still. He took a breath. It felt different already, as if the air itself had changed. When the emergency lights above flickered on a few seconds later, he saw Lena still standing across from him, her hands hanging at her sides, her eyes fixed on his. But her expression was different now, softer, almost sad. "You really did it," she murmured. Behind them, the door stood open. The man in the suit was still there, But he was no longer watching them with confidence or calculation. Instead, he stood very still, his face pale in the glow of the emergency lights. His eyes narrowed, his jaw tight. "You have no idea," he said slowly, "what you've just done." Lena stepped between them then, her scarf slipping loose from her neck. Her voice was calm, but there was steel in it now. "Oh, he knows," she said. "That's why he pressed it." The man didn't move. His hands, usually so controlled, twitched at his sides, but he made no move to stop them. And for the first time, Sundar noticed. He looked afraid. Something deep inside Sundar uncoiled at that sight. The boy who had grown up in the crowded streets of Chennai, who had been told countless times that he didn't belong, who had learned to endure the quiet humiliations of a world that rarely looked past skin or accent or clothing. That boy now stood taller. He took one last look at the man in the suit, then turned to Lena. "What happens now?" He asked. She didn't answer right away. She walked over to the chair in the center of the room, placed her hand on its back, and stared down at the floor for a long time before she spoke. "Now," she said quietly, "you find out who you really are, when no one's writing your story for you anymore." The words sank into him like stones dropped into deep water. He glanced back once more, but the man in the suit had already turned and was walking away, his figure swallowed by the shadows beyond the doorway. The silence in the room was complete. Again, but it felt different now, not oppressive but open, like a blank page waiting for its first word. Lena turned toward him, her expression unreadable. "You won't see me again," she said. He frowned. "Why?" She shook her head faintly, the corners of her mouth tilting in something that almost looked like a smile. "Because you don't need me anymore," she replied. He wanted to ask her more, where she would go, what she would do now. But she was already walking toward the opposite door, her steps quiet and sure. He stood alone in the room for a long time after she was gone. He finally left the warehouse just before dawn. Outside, the city was bathed in the cool, pale light of early morning. The streets were empty. The air felt clean. As he walked through the quiet streets, he began to notice small things. The sound of birds overhead, the faint smell of fresh bread from a distant bakery, the warmth of sunlight on his face. But there were bigger changes too. His phone, when he finally turned it on, was blank. No contacts, no messages, no emails, as if he had never existed in the digital world at all. When he tried to hail a cab, the driver squinted at him like he didn't recognize him. When he passed by one of his company's billboards, the one that once bore his own face and name, it was gone now, replaced with something else entirely. He paused on the sidewalk and stared up at the blank space. Where his name used to shine. It was true. He had disappeared from their game, but instead of fear, he felt something else stirring in his chest. Something he hadn't felt in years. Freedom. He walked on. He walked past the cafes where people sat hunched over their screens, past the polished lobbies of buildings he once thought he owned, past the faces of strangers who would never know his name now. And somewhere deep inside him, the boy he once was, the boy who had believed in the power of kindness and resilience and quiet dignity, smiled. He kept walking into the heart of the city, into the rising sun, into a story no one else would write for him. Asterisk.